Hey, how's it going everyone? It's Evil Monkey here, back with another build. Now this one's for Enzo using Focus Fire. And I gotta say, this build creates an amazing mesh of gunplay and ability play. Something that I feel like First Descendant has had an issue with throughout its lifetime, where usually most builds either focus on gunplay or ability play. But this one feels like it hits that perfect synergy almost, where you're not only using your abilities to do things like damage, buff yourself, but you're also using your gun to also do damage, and it becomes a necessary part of this build. And I've been having a lot of fun with this. This creates a really nice fresh playstyle. Now if you guys don't know what Focus Fire does, I'll throw it up on the screen there, go ahead and pause and read what it does. But this build has been a lot of fun to run, and it's able to go through all current content, meaning it's a perfect build if you want a new playstyle. But hey, that's enough of me yapping. Let's go ahead and get you guys into this build so you can get out there playing Enzo. As always, we gotta start off with our mod section. Now I'll go ahead and break down each mod, why you run it, and how it fits into the build. So let's go ahead and get started with our first section here. And to start off our mod section will be our crit mods. And yes, this does mean Enzo is a crit character. And this is thanks to his passive giving him skill critical hit rate. Now our first mod we're going to go over here is Skill Insight. Now the reason we're running this is because it gives you skill critical hit rate and the highest any module can give you, with no downside. And this is going to be needed for us to be able to achieve a 100% crit rate. Our next one is Skill Concentration. Now this one gives you skill critical hit rate damage. You want to do more damage, so you need this one, and it also gives you the most possible out of any mod without any downside, similar to how we're running Skill Insight. And then Frontline, we're running this one because this one also gives you skill crit damage and a little bit of skill hit rate. Now we need this one and also a little bit in the Arche Tree, plus Enzo's passive, and we're able to hit 100% skill critical hit rate, which is really nice because of how crit rate works in First Descendant. You definitely always want 100% if possible. And we're running all these once again just to max out our damage. Enzo can very easily hit 100% skill crit rate, and when you can do that with a character in First Descendant, it's usually the best thing to do because of how crit multipliers work. And next up is our cooldown section. Now, to start off this cooldown section, the first mod we're going to be running is MP Conversion. Now the reason we're running this one is because this gives you the largest amount of skill cooldown out of any mod in the game. But the only downside being minus max MP, which is fine, because you really won't be consuming too much MP in this build. But even the ones that you do consume, we can easily keep up with, because in your component set, your substats will pretty much all be MP recovery. But you really don't consume too much MP in this build because a lot of your damage is coming from your third ability enhancing your gun damage. So a lot of your damage will be related to your gun, with probably the thing consuming the most MP will actually be your second ability, which we'll talk about that here in a second. But our next mod is Nimble Fingers, and the reason we're running this is just your basic cooldown mod. It actually gives a fair amount of skill cooldown. The only thing higher than this would be MP Conversion, and there's actually no downside. Now, why are we running so much cooldown in this build? It is actually related to our second ability and our third ability. So for our second ability, the reason we're running this is because if you guys don't know what your second ability does, number one, it causes explosion of damage, but also has a really cool other effect. It automatically reloads your gun's magazine when you use it. So it makes it really efficient in this build because you don't have to reload your gun. Instead, when your magazine runs out, you just throw out a rocket with your second ability, and your magazine's reloaded, and you just threw out an ability that does a lot of damage with a large radius. Meaning you probably just cleared out the whole wave in front of you, and then your gun's prepped up to kill the next wave. And our third ability, which is the other reason we're running cooldown here, is the ability that's actually going to be enhancing your gun. So this one actually causes your firearms to do additional damage based off your skill power. And also its other big effect, and this is the reason why we really want it to continuously going, is it gives you continuous shield recovery. So about every half a second, it regens 10% of your shields. Meaning every second you regen 20% of your shields. And this is really good because this is actually where most of our tankiness slash bulkiness is going to be coming from. So you really want this to be permanently up, meaning we need a lower skill cooldown so that we can constantly use it. Otherwise, you'll feel a lot squishier. Now, another mod group relating to our third ability is Skill Duration. Now, for this one, we're going to be running Skill Extension because this actually gives you a lot of skill duration and is basic with no downside. Now, there is technically one that gives slightly more skill duration, that's maximized duration, but this is only about a 4% difference in skill duration increase, and has the downside of lowering your skill power modifier. And that small difference does not make up for the massive downside, so instead we just run the basic version, which has no downside. Now, why are we actually running skill extension and skill duration here as a result? Well, that actually relates to mainly our third ability, because once again we want this continuously going, because it gives you a whole bunch of buffs and enhances your damage. And without this, you actually can't keep it going. So you need this small, little bitty amount of duration so that you can have this continuously going. Now, there's actually another reason, and that relates to Enzo's passive and his first ability. Both also give you buffs. And it's really nice to be able to extend out the duration of those buffs, so you don't have to spend a couple seconds in the middle of fighting to rebuff yourself. Instead, with the skill duration, you have a longer DPS window, which means you're going to get out more damage before once again you have to, rebuff yourself. So that's why skill duration is really nice here. It just helps kind of your flow of combat a lot. And now onto our skill power section. Now the first one we're going to run here is focus on non-attribute, and this is because Enzo's a non-attribute character, so he can use that non-attribute skill power. And then we also want the skill cooldown, once again, mainly for our third ability, so that can be continuously going. The next one is focus on singular, and this is for similar logic as focus on non-attribute. Enzo is a singular character, with every ability also scaling off singular. And we want the cooldown, once again, to help your third ability mainly remain continuously up. And finally, onto our defensive mod section. Now for this one, we're going to be running increased shield. The reason being is this is your basic shield increased mod, which doesn't have any downside, and it's actually a fairly high amount. Now there's technically also, in this section, one that can give you slightly more max shield, but it's only about a 7% increase, and you lose about 50% of your HP. And even though we're mainly focusing on shields for our defense, I'd like to have that 50% extra HP, just in case if an enemy does hit you rather hard. This way you won't get one shot. Since a big thing of this is a lot of our survivability is coming from our third ability, regenerating your shields. But there's also the slight possibility an enemy will just pop your shields instantly, and if you're at 1 HP, you're just going to go down. So instead, that little bit extra HP adds that extra cushion. Now I have tested this in a lot of the newer dungeons, such as Super Reactor, and also Forbidden Sanctuary, and I've had no issues with surviving. The increased shield gives you that just enough shield that the enemies won't be able to get through your shields, thanks to, once again, every 1 second you just regenerating 20% of your shields. Well, actually, every 0.5 seconds you regen 10%, but, it's easier to say 20% per second. And so that's why we're running max shield here. It's just, this is going to be your main defense stat. And now for our Ancestor module, as the same as we do with every build video, Ancestor modules will be in their own section. So if you guys want to jump to that, you can go ahead and click the timestamp in the timeline of the video, or in the description of the video, there's also timestamps that you can click on. And you can go and just jump to the Ancestor module and check that out, where we'll be breaking it down to a tiered chart so you guys can see if your Ancestor module is good or if you want to re-roll that module. Now that we've gone over all the main modules, let's go ahead and go over the trigger modules. Now we're going to cover 3 different trigger modules here, starting with Power Beyond. Now Power Beyond is one I recommend. The reason being is this just gives you flat skill power, and that increases the damage of your second, third, and fourth ability, which is really nice because that's pretty much what we want, is more damage. The only downside is there's no really unique effect here, so there's no big showy thing, but this is just very efficient to use. And there's also no real utility here. But the next trigger module actually does have some utility, and that's Tactical Acceleration. Now, Tactical Acceleration may seem slightly weird to run because it's doing something a little bit redundant with giving us basically unlimited ammo, or not really unlimited ammo, but it's continuously refilling our ammo for us. And since we already have our second ability, which instantly reloads our magazine, it seems a little weird to run this, but there is a scenario for this. Now, first off, I gotta say, one of the really big buffs of this is the movement speed. Just being able to go faster and being range for your turret, your fourth ability, is really nice. But the infinitely reloading ammo is also fairly nice. Now, this is because if you are shooting a really fast gun that has a really small magazine size and you're constantly having to reload every like half a second to maybe 2 seconds, you may actually run out of stacks of your second ability and be using it faster than those stacks can be refilled. Which means probably about 15-ish seconds into the fight, if once again you're having to reload every half second, you're probably going to have to end up waiting for the cooldown of your second ability or just manually reloading. So the nice thing about tactical acceleration is it can give you about 11 or 12-ish seconds, depending on, what you've rolled, to just let that second ability recharge for you while tactical acceleration is handling your reloading for you. Meaning you don't have to have that kind of weird, like, split second where you're reloading, which kind of feels bad. And then the third one we'll go over is Tactical Strike. Now, Tactical Strike is kind of a weird one to run. And this is the one that came out with Enzo's rework. But the reason it's kind of awkward to run is the only super consistent way to activate it is your first ability, which has a somewhat long animation, and also has about a 6-second cooldown, meaning you can't very consistently use this. Even though your fourth ability will be constantly applying the mark for the explosion, you just can't really consistently trigger it. That's why I think Power Beyond is much better, is because Power Beyond is much more consistent damage increase, versus Tactical Strike, which is just a burst amount of damage every 6-ish seconds, which you don't really need for wave clear nor boss killing. In fact, the only time I feel like this would be good is if you had a lot of high health targets in front of you that weren't instantly dying already, and you wanted to do some chain explosions with this, because you can trigger multiple explosions at once if the enemies are clumped up enough. But there are a couple interesting interactions for this one, and I'll show those off in the tips and tricks section. But to sum it up, Power Beyond is the one I recommend. Tactical Acceleration is a really nice utility if you feel like you're going through your second ability stacks too fast and you want something to cover the reload while those are on cooldown. And then Tactical Strike, I wouldn't really recommend, but it does have its uses for additional wave clear. And let's go ahead and move on to our last mod section, the Ancestor modules. Now for our Ancestor modules, because it is almost impossible to get a perfect Ancestor module, what we're going to do here instead is we're going to take every stat the Ancestor module can roll and throw it into a tier chart. And you guys can use this as a reference to determine if your Ancestor module is good and you want to keep it, or bad and you want to re-roll it. Now the other nice thing about Enzo here is that he can utilize most stats an Ancestor module can roll. So most Ancestor modules you get are just honestly going to be fairly good, or at least decent. But let's go and get into this tier chart, starting with S tier, our best one. Starting this off is skill critical hit damage. Now this is because, once again, Enzo is a skill crit character, so just increasing this damage will greatly amplify his damage overall. Next up is skill duration up. Now this one, as I've talked about before in the video, duration is really good because it extends out all your buffs, meaning you won't have to recast your buffs as often, thus increasing the DPS window you get, which is something you really want, because having to recast every buff fairly often doesn't feel exactly great. And then after that, we're going to have singular skill power boost ratio, singular skill modifier, and non-attribute skill power boost ratio. Now we have all these in S tier for the same reason. Enzo is a non-attribute singular character where all of his abilities scale off those two stats. Thus, these three stats will just greatly amplify your damage, and more damage is always good for Descendant. Next up is A tier. Now A tier is still a really good tier, and all these stats will still be really good to roll. The first one, though, is Max Shield. Now this is mainly due to your third ability. Because of our third ability regenerating 10% of your shields constantly. Shields are our main defense stat, as we've already established. But because it's 10%, more max shields means that will heal a higher value, and will overall make you a lot bulkier, and having more survivability is always a really good thing. So shields are a really good stat to roll. In fact, I almost put this in S tier, but just slightly falls below everything else in S tier. Next up is skill effect range. Now, skill effect range is the one stat I wish we could have squeezed a little bit more into our mod section, but because there was no room for it, we weren't allowed to do that. But I did experiment with this stat, and it feels amazing to have increased range. Your abilities just hit such a large radius with this. It helps a lot with wave clear, and just feels an amazing stat. And then finally is skill critical hit rate. Now, the reason why this one ends up here, and this one almost went down to B tier, but I moved it up to A tier, because if you roll a high enough stat in this, you can actually remove one of our crit modules and put something like a ultimate module in its place, or more max shield, or skill effect range. So rolling skill critical hit rate, while it doesn't necessarily increase stats directly, does allow you to replace a module, which can allow for more flexibility in the build. It's a really good stat. And then onto our middle of the pack row, which is B tier. These stats are fairly good still, but not quite good enough. Just kind of middle of the pack values. The first one will be defense. Now, this is just always a good generic value to roll. More survivability is always good. The only issue with the rolling defense here is you can technically have too much defense in the build, where more defense becomes less effective. But it's still an overall good stat to roll because it's more survivability. And then skill cooldown. Now, the nice thing about skill cooldown is it can allow you to remove cooldown in other places of the build, and allow those parts of the build to do more damage. For example, you can remove Focus On module and replace it with its more basic version that just has more skill power scaling in it. It can also allow you to more easily keep up with your second ability's cooldowns, which you'll be spamming a lot for reloading. Overall, this is a fairly decent stat, but skill duration is just so much better. And then next up is C tier. Now, C tier is a weird tier. This is stats you don't want to take as a positive or a negative. Because if you take them as a positive, they do little to nothing to help with the build. But if you take them as a negative stat, they do hurt the build. And first up is skill cost. Now, skill cost, we already pretty much manage our MP just fine. You don't run into any MP issues, so this does nothing to help the build. But if you were to take this as a negative stat, you might end up running out of MP because your abilities might end up costing too much. Then max HP is our next one. Even though, yes, we do mainly use defense and shields as our two defensive values, you really don't want to take away from your max HP, because your max HP is going to act as a little bit of a cushion. In case if anything hits you just a little bit too hard that your shield regen can't keep up with it, or maybe goes over your max shield value, the HP just acts as a little extra barrier between you surviving and you getting downed. And last up here is max MP. Now, the reason this is in C tier and not D tier is because we really don't want to lower our max MP too much, because it is a stat you use a decent amount, and we already have other places that are removing max MP. But in all honesty, it is borderline between C and D tier. And for our final tier is going to be D tier. Now, this is a tier that if you're going to take any negative values in your Ancestor module, this is the perfect tier, as these ones do nothing if you get them positive, and they do nothing if you get them negative. So they'll have zero impact on the build if you take them as negative values. Now, our two stats here are Dimension Skill Modifier and Dimension Skill Power Boost Ratio. And this is because Enzo just doesn't use any Dimension Skill Power. He's a singular character, and he only scales off that with all four of his abilities. So, either of these two stats belong in D tier. The unfortunate thing, though, about Enzo actually being able to use most of his stats is D tier is relatively small in this one. So there's not too many negative stat values you can take for an Ancestor module. But that will wrap up the Ancestor module section. Hopefully this tier chart will help you guys determine if your Ancestor modules are good, or if you want to go ahead and re-roll them. And with all of our mod sections done, let's go ahead and hop into our Arche Tree. Now, this is going to be a fairly standard Arche Tree, with it specializing in skill power and skill crit. The only difference is we only need to grab one skill crit node to be able to hit that 100% skill critical hit rate. with the combination of our mods, the Arche Tree, and Enzo's passive. And this allows us to also throw in 3 points into the nodes for duration, which helps us be able to keep your third ability continuously going. Because once again, we want that permanently up because it enhances your gun to be able to do more damage, and also gives you a massive amount of survivability with the regen to your shields. Also, speaking of our enhanced gun here, the reason why we're just going so far into skill power instead of going to firearms, since, as I said earlier in the video, a large portion of your damage will actually be from your firearm, it's because a lot of that damage will end up scaling off skill power, since your third ability enhances your gun to do more damage based off your skill power. And so, thus, we have to go skill power. Now, moving on to your Mutant Cells, there are 2 Mutant Cells you can run here. You can go ahead and run Arche Chain Catalyst, which is the one I recommend, since what this one will do is it will go ahead and reduce enemies' non-attribute resistance, which scales really well the further and further you go in the game, as enemies get higher and higher resistance. This will actually allow you to do a lot of damage. And then the other one that you can run is non-attribute Cohesion. Now this one's really good because it gives you stacking skill power, which is always good, you're just going to do more damage. But I think Arche Catalyst scales better. Also, as a side note, I would not recommend Defense Neutralization. Even though, yes, it reduces enemies' resistance, which allows your gun to do more damage, it actually does not reduce non-attribute resistance, which is going to be the majority of our damage. So I would avoid Defense Neutralization in this build. Let's go ahead and move on to our component set now. So for our component set here, we're going to run an Enlightened Mage set. Now this is because Enlightened Mage set's buff gives the largest amount of skill power any non-attribute character can get from a component set, and Enzo is a non-attribute character. Also, since Enzo's spamming on his abilities a lot with your second ability reloading your ammo constantly, and your third ability needing to be reapplied a lot, you're actually able to keep up with the amount of stacks you need for Enlightened Mage set, so you can constantly proc the buff. Now, moving on to our subsets here, you're going to want to run Max MP, MP Recovery in combat, and MP Recovery modifier. Now, this is to help us keep up with our MP costs. As long as you run these 3 stats, you should never run out of MP, which is what we want. And then for the other substats we're going to run Shield Recovery in combat, Max Shield, and Shield Recovery modifier. Now, we're running these 3 because, as we stated earlier in the build, most of our defensive stats are going to be in our shields. So we want to ramp that up as much as possible with these stats. This will give us more survivability so you don't get downed, which is what we want to see. Now going on to our component cores, as I just stated with us running shields, we're going to of course run 4 max shields here. This is once again, Enzo's using his shields for survivability, so we want as much shields possible, especially since our third ability is going to be regenning 10% every about half a second. And then for your other cores, you're going to want 2 defense. This is just because defense is a really good general stat to have. And then your other 2 cores are going to be 2 free slots. Now this is so that you can just change this depending on what you're fighting. So if you're fighting toxic enemies, you can throw in toxic resistance there. Electric enemies, electric resistance, so on and so forth. Or you just run 2 more defense cores, having 4 total defense cores, if you just want good general cores that you can run there. Now let's go ahead and take a look at our Inversion Reinforcement. So for our first one, we're going to run Focus Boost. Now this is just to help a little bit better with your MP management. It's going to lower your skill costs, which is going to be helpful. Then our next one will be Deploy Hardened Shell. It just reduces damage you're going to take by a percentage, so it's just really good in general to have. It's a really good defensive trait. And then our third one will be Shield Regeneration Algorithm. Since shields are our main source of defense here, having something that helps us regen it will be really nice. There's just a little bit extra regen that's really good to run. Let's go ahead and move on to the Reactor now. For the Reactor, you're going to want a non-attribute singular reactor. Now, this is because Enzo's a non-attribute character, and all of his abilities scale off of singular. For your substats in this, your first stat is always going to be skill crit damage. This is because Enzo is a skill crit character, and it's going to give you the most scaling in your damage. For your second stat, though, you can grab 1 or 2 stats. You can either grab skill cooldown or skill duration. And this is once again related to something we talked about in the mod section with your third ability needing to have the duration be longer or at least match your cooldown so you can permanently have that ability up. And this is going to be able to get you there so that you can just barely have enough duration to outlast the cooldown. Now, I recommend the duration over the cooldown in this case because, once again, as something we talked about in the mod section, duration will also extend out all your buffs so you can have a longer DPS window without having to reapply every buff to yourself. But cooldown also works in this case. Both are okay. Now, I also have to make one other note here. If you do not have skill cooldown here or duration, the difference between your cooldown and the duration on your third ability is only about 0.5 seconds, which is not a large amount. And the animation also eats up a little bit of that cooldown. So technically, if you are fine with your ability being down for 0.5 seconds, you can actually replace this with non-attribute skill power or singular skill power. I would recommend definitely the duration, but if you want slightly more damage per ability cast, that is also an option. But the duration does feel a lot better and keeps your DPS window going longer. And now let's go ahead and move on to the gun section of this video. And don't forget, because Enzo is a hybrid character, meaning he uses both his skills and his guns, the guns are also equally important to the other sections we've covered in this video. Now, for the guns we'll be running in this build, it'll be Thunder Cage, Restored Relic, and Malevolent. And there is a good reason why we're running these three weapons, and it has to do with Enzo's passive. Now, if you don't know what Enzo's passive is, after he consumes a set amount of ammo across 3 different ammo types, aka general rounds, impact rounds, and high-powered rounds, as we do in this build, he activates his passive buff, which gives him a large increase in skill critical hit rate and skill crit damage. Now, this is the main reason that Enzo actually becomes a skill crit character, meaning we really want to be able to activate this passive easily. And thus we're running these 3 guns because they fit under certain criteria that we were really looking for. And the first of these criteria that we want all 3 weapons to be able to cover is we want them all to have extremely high fire rate. And this is because of Enzo's passive. Since you need to consume ammo to activate your passive, you want guns that can cycle extremely fast through your ammo count. Now, the other benefit of this is because of Enzo's infinitely regenning ammo that you get from your first and fourth ability, you actually don't have to worry about your ammo reserves really ever. And this really works well with fire rate. So you definitely want all 3 guns to have high fire rate because, once again, faster buff activation, and compared to other builds, you don't have to worry about running out of ammo. The next thing we really want to look for is that all 3 guns are using different ammo types. Thus, high-powered rounds, impact rounds, and general rounds. And this is once again because that's one of the requirements for Enzo's passive to activate. And then the last criteria we want is we want at least 1 gun here to also have incredibly high damage. Now this is just because to activate your third ability, which enhances your bullets, you really just want a high-powered gun on top of that so it adds the damage. The 2 damage pools are independent, but since you're already shooting the gun to activate your third ability, you might as well have the gun that you're shooting also do high damage since you want as much damage as possible in first Descendant. And for all these 3 guns, if we were to each one individually go over, we're running Thunder Cage here because it's high damage and high fire rate general rounds. We're running Restored Relic because it's nice AoE damage and high damage, rapid fire, high powered rounds. And then Malevolent is kind of our leftover gun. We're running this because we really just want a rapid shooting impact round. That's pretty much the only reason. In fact, we'll go over the builds here in a second for each of the guns. And this one we're going to pretty much be bare bones on it, since it really just needs to shoot fast, and luckily with how we run it, you'll be able to get your ammo count in about half a second. And we're only really running impact rounds here because each of the 3 ammo types all have different, or each of the 4 ammo types, we're only running 3 here, but there's 4 in total, have different ammo requirements. High powered rounds and impact rounds are the 2 lowest, with general rounds and special rounds actually being decently high. And the only reason we're running general rounds over special rounds, once again, is because general rounds weapons tend to be a lot stronger than special rounds. But let's go ahead and hop into the weapon builds. Now we will go over a general overview of each of the builds for each 3 weapons, but we won't go really in depth into the build. I'll just kind of generically go over how each of the builds works and what you want to run. Now the nice thing is, because of most of your damage coming from your 3rd ability on Enzo, even though we do want damage from the guns, you are more than free to swap around the gun builds however you want to. If you have more preferred Thunder Cage build that you want to run, that'll work. Don't forget, Enzo doesn't actually buff crit or firearm crit, nor multi-hit damage, nor multi-hit rate at all. So you're pretty much free to swap around builds however you want to. We don't need a specific gun type, as long as it fulfills the criteria of rapid fire, well, high fire rate, however you want to say it, at least 1 doing high damage, and all 3 being different ammo types. But let's go ahead and go on with our first one here with Thunder Cage. And now for the Thunder Cage build we're going to run, it's just going to be a fairly general Thunder Cage build based around a crit. As you can see in our substats for our gun, we're mainly just trying to ramp up that crit and its base firearm and electric attack. And then similarly in our cores, we're also just trying to ramp those stats along with fire rate, because once again we want that for Enzo's passive to have a very high fire rate. In fact, with Enzo's first ability here, buffing our fire rate also on top of what we'll get in the mods and cores, you'll actually be able to hit the cap on fire rate here, so you'll be able to shoot as fast as you can with a Thunder Cage. And then for our mods, it's just similar to what I just said. We are running crit, firearm, and fire rate up. So once again, these already enhance everything that makes Thunder Cage good. And it's just, once again, just generally how you build Thunder Cage. Now, as a side note, because you will be shooting as fast as you can, you may actually end up running out of your stacks for your second ability and not be able to keep up the cooldown. So you can drop some of the fire rate if you want to, or you can swap out the special mod there for increased magazine size, which will help you be able to keep up with that cooldown a little bit better. But you will lose a little bit of damage. Next is our Restored Relic. Now for Restored Relic, I personally went for the multi-hit version here. You can do whichever version you really want to do, because once again, Enzo doesn't ramp up or nor buff multi-hit nor firearm crit. So you're free to do whichever version you want to. But for this one, we just did the standard stack up as much fire rate as you can with our cores, and then enhance our multi-hit and base damage with our substats here. And we also did that in our mods. We go ahead and just run as much damage as we can with fire rate and multi-hit damage. And this works out pretty well with Restored Relic. And also, as another note, one of the reasons we also want to run Restored Relic here is because high-powered rounds have the lowest ammo count that you need to hit for Enzo's buff. And in fact, you can do it in 1 magazine with the Restored Relic, which works really well. And once again, it also does a large amount of damage for AoE. And for our final gun is Malevolent here. Now, Malevolent, the only thing that really matters here for you in cores is getting your fire rate up, so you can shoot as fast as possible. And our substats do not matter, because once again, we are only using Malevolent here to fulfill the requirement to activate Enzo's passive. And then if we go onto our mods, we're doing something similar. We're running fire rate and magazine size up. Now, you do want magazine size up here, so that you can actually, when you fire off Malevolent, you don't have to reload to get the passive requirement. If you up the magazine size, you can actually do this in 1 clip, which is really important. And also the reason we're running impact rounds once again over something like special rounds is because impact rounds has the second lowest ammo requirement out of the 4 ammo types, which is significantly lower than special rounds and general rounds. And Malevolent is the fastest possible shooting impact round gun that you can actually have, so it works out perfectly. Now once again, this is very bare bones minimum, so if you do want Malevolent to do damage, you can do a damaged version, but all that's required for this build is this bare bones version, since you'll only be shooting it for about half a second to a second to get your buff requirement, and then swapping to either Thunder Cage or Restored Relic, which are actually going to do real damage. Now, those are all 3 builds. I know we went over those fairly fast. And once again, if you want to, you can swap around to your preferred versions of those builds if you have one that you may prefer more. it's not going to affect the build as long as they still do damage, at least for Thunder Cage. And possibly Restore Relic if you want to use that one more. Now, also as another note, there is a thing I want to go over here real quick. These 3 guns are fairly optimal for this build, but they are just one combination that you can run. Since it only requires you to have 3 different ammo types, you can actually swap out with other guns that you want to use instead of one of these 3 guns, as long as they fulfill the requirements that we went over before, where all 3 are rapid fire, at least one is high damage, and once again, 3 different ammo types. So have some fun exploring different combos, but these 3 are at least one of the most optimal combos that you can have. Now let's move on to our tips and tricks section. We'll show you guys a few things you probably need to know about Enzo before you start using him. So first one has to do with our passive on Enzo. So Enzo's passive has the very specific wording when you consume ammo. That's how you build up your passive. Well, there's a modifier in the game that says you will not consume ammo for a set period of time. One such one here is firing Fiesta, which when you reload, you don't consume rounds. So I'll go ahead and show you guys what I'm talking about. We'll shoot a little bit. Okay, so it's at 4. Reload. Got firing Fiesta triggering, and the counter doesn't go up. Now it goes up again, and that's the counter for you building up your passive next to the gun. And this also works with a modifier you can randomly get on some maps. And like I said, it can just kind of mess you up a little bit on Enzo, so that you can't really build up your passive, which unfortunately feels pretty awful because your passive accounts are probably over half your damage, since it gets you up to 100% crit rate. Now, the next thing I want to show you guys was just a little thing here where I wanted to give you guys a reminder for your first abilities buff, which will give you a whole bunch of attack speed, which is one of the key ways you guys are going to build up your passives count really quickly. So I just want to show you guys here. This is without it. As you guys can see, we're sitting at 800 fire rate. And let's go ahead and do that. And it takes significantly less time. So your first ability buff really does matter for you guys being able to build up that passive really fast. Just wanted to give you guys that one real quick. Next, I wanted to show you guys one that has to do with Tactical Strike. Now, as I said before, I don't think this one's very good. But in case, you know, they buff it like they often do with underperforming trigger modules, I just want to show you guys this real quick. It has to do with activating it. So if you guys will go ahead and mark it with this, you guys mark. Turns out you can just use your first ability to pop it. Like so. And honestly, the range of what you can pop it is pretty forgiving. I've learned basically as long as you throw it in their visual hitbox, so like anywhere they can see, basically any point in front of them, you will usually trigger it. So you can even run all the way back here. Boom. So it doesn't really have specific range. It's more or less you just have to throw it in front of them. If you throw it behind them though, there is like an angle behind them where it won't trigger it. And then the last thing I want to show you guys, because it's also fairly important, I'm going to summon our drone. Your drone actually does stay up while you're driving around. That's just kind of important because that means you don't have to reactivate it once you get off your bike. It just stays active for its duration. And not every turret does this. And that's it for our tips and tricks. Hopefully that'll help you guys be able to use Enzo to his max potential here. And let's go ahead and wrap it up for this Enzo build video. I've been enjoying this more hybrid playstyle for Enzo, where we're kind of more evenly mixing gunplay and ability play. But let me know what you guys thought about the build in the comments down below, or if you have any questions, also go ahead and hit me up down there. And if you enjoyed the video, or you plan to use the build, I appreciate you hitting that like button. It helps the video a lot. Also, if you want to be notified when the next video comes out, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. And I also stream every day on Twitch. I'll go ahead and throw up the information on the screen there if you guys want to chat for Descendant or ask me any live questions. I'm always up to chat for Descendant there. And once again, if you guys could hit that like button, I really would appreciate it. It helps the video get out to a lot more people. But that's going to go and wrap it up for this video. I appreciate y'all watching. I'll catch y'all again next time.